Hello and welcome to this, our 60-second live stream, Kernels of Truth. Okay, this is of course in reference to our most recent popcorn review, where we did David Downs' Pyramids of Egypt. So it's sort of a play on words of our popcorn reviews. Now, we are going to be doing more popcorn reviews in the future, and we might have something already selected for the next one. We're not saying what it is. The popcorn always keeps its secrets. So, with that said, tonight we are going to do what we do every night, which is we're going to take your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible. And the rules are the same as always. Super chats have priority. If you don't want to contribute a super chat, we'll still answer questions. Okay, so we do answer a lot of non-super chats. Now, we are a little more picky about non-super chats. The questions that really interest us will get probably more attention than those that don't. So, we will sort of probably focus in more on like ancient Egypt or biblical connections of art to archaeology and that sort of thing. Those sorts of questions, because that's really what I find interesting, or popular culture. Okay, so we don't guarantee that every question gets answered. We just, if we did that, try to do that, we would be here all night. And I know there are members of my esteemed and cultured audience who would love me if I just kept answering questions all night. And my wife reminds me I would be single if I did that. Okay, so the answer to that would be no. We're not going to do that. We also ask that if you do put in a question and it's not a super chat, that you put a Q and a colon in front of the question, so that I know it's directed to me personally and not to somebody else in the live stream. I scan for that Q and colon. If it's not there, I'll just skip right over it. The other thing is, if it has to do with a Bible passage or a foreign word, we ask that you include the actual reference to the passage. The book, chapter, and verse. Or what you think the word means and what language it comes from, just so I have a little context to go off of. All right? And if you forget, if you do forget the rules, they're in the little scroll thing at the bottom. So there's a constant reminder there to tell you what the rules are. Also, we ask that you don't repeat questions. If you repeat a question more than once, we will not answer it. Period. Because we had too much abuse in some previous live streams over this. So we just had to say, okay, absolutely no repeating of a question. This is a super chat. You can repeat those all you want. We'll just keep saying thank you and just go on to the next one. Okay? So, with that said, we also want to say that we hope that you like these live streams. We hope you love the content, and if you want more of this content, please consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification so you will receive more of this content in the future. So that's it. Let's get into it. Okay, we're gonna start the night with some non-super chats because that's what we usually do. Okay, our first non-super chat is from Chow Yi. And he said, ever considered doing a tutorial series about archaeological methods or the historical method like the one on hieroglyphics? Yeah, I've considered it. I've actually been asked to, my publisher once asked if I would consider doing a book on, say, archaeological fallacies. Kind of like what David Hackett Fisher did with historians' fallacies, but one that's specifically geared towards archaeology. So, it's something that I have considered doing, on archaeological methods and the problems that plague some archaeological methods and some reasoning that you sometimes find in archaeological literature. So, yeah, I have considered doing it. Don't have any firm plans for it at the moment. I'd love to do some other projects before that. Like, for example, I'd love to get my book on chronology out. I'd love to get my book on the plagues of the Exodus out. Because I think those are books that, say, your average reader would really benefit from. So there are projects we want to do first. We got to find the time, though. And that's what's killing me right now, is just the lack of time. I'm just finding I'm just so pressed between my day job and making more content for this YouTube channel that I don't have much time to write, and that's killing me, because I've got all these great ideas and I really want to start realizing some of them. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's a good question. It's an interesting question. It's something we have considered. Thank you very much. Okay. The next non-super chat comes from Matthew Chanot, and he asks, does the problem of evil go beyond the Christian context? Oh yes, it does. For instance, do atheists also face the same problem of evil? Well, not the same problem, but they experience a problem of evil. And he says, i.e. explaining why evil exists within their own theories. Now, they don't have a problem with the ontology of evil. You know, for them it's just sort of a brute fact, something that's there. And that's how that's sort of the end of the conversation for them, is that evil is a brute fact. Where it gets the atheist problem of evil, and there's a theist problem of evil, and there's an atheist problem of evil. Okay, I mean, the theistic problem of evil is you have an all-good God, evil exists, therefore God does not exist, or he is not good. Okay? So that's the theistic problem of evil. The atheistic problem of evil is a matter of definition, which is, what is evil? How do you define evil? And that is a very, very sticky wicket for the atheist. That is the atheistic problem of evil, where, say, without a all-good reference point. Because you see, the reason why evil works so well in, say, a theistic worldview is because you have a all-good reference standard to compare all acts and say, okay, compared to this all-good being, these acts in defiance are evil. And they're blatantly so. You don't have that with atheism. So what you have is a problem of defining what is evil. And it usually comes down to something like, well, if it feels bad, makes me feel bad, it hurts me, it's evil. Okay, that doesn't really capture it. That's more of a solipsistic point of view. And solipsisms have their philosophical problems. So I think there's definitely an atheistic problem of evil that doesn't get nearly as much attention as it should. But there is an atheistic problem of evil, and it is quite problematic. I mean, you know, you pin an atheist down, and it eventually sort of boils down to, well, sure, I'm good without God, but that just means I'm better than Hitler. And it really proves to be a pretty low bar when you get right down to it. And that's very, very problematic, because while they might be able to, with a brute facts kind of apologetic, say, okay, evil exists, defining that evil, and then saying, okay, this in comparison is good, proves to be so low as to be almost, your evil is almost inseparable from your good. I mean, really. The I'm not Hitler thing is just doesn't, it's not that persuasive. So, yeah, they've got a problem too. And, you know, some atheist philosophers have worked on this and have tried to solve it with not so great success. So anyway, thank you very much for your question. It's an interesting question, and I hope that explained it. Okay, the third non-super chat we'll take is from Kurt F. Dr. Falk, how are you? Well, I'm well, thank you. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I had a very long day at work, but I'm not hurting as bad as earlier in the week. So that's a plus. What is your take on the Samaritan's version of the Pentateuch? Yeah, the Samaritan Pentateuch. Okay. Is it of greater antiquity and more accurate than the Masoretic text? Thank you. Okay. Now, that is that's an interesting question. Is it of greater antiquity? The answer is probably yes. It is probably at least a few hundred years older. The way it branched off of the other text was probably a few hundred years before, say, the Masoretic text did. It could conceivably even be older in its original form than the Septuagint, which would be pretty amazing right there. We do have what's called Samaritan Pentateuch type texts amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls. So some of those readings are extant in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, just because it's older doesn't necessarily mean is it more accurate. Emmanuel Tove basically said in one of his pieces that, say, compared to the other text types, text families, like the Septuagint, like the Samaritan Pentateuch, the Masoretic text actually has, say, greater accuracy over time. That's sort of the critical thing is, given the amount of textual material we have from the Masoretic text and its consistency over 2,000 years, it has remained a remarkably accurately transmitted text. More so than the Samaritan Pentateuch, more so than the Septuagint. So accuracy does not equate to age. But the Samaritan Pentateuch does appear to be at least older than Masoretic text. Maybe. We're not sure. Maybe older than the Septuagint. Again, there's no guarantee of age here because we're dealing here with perceived antiquity, and we don't necessarily have all the text we need to make that firm determination. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It is an interesting question. I myself find the Samaritan Pentateuch to be exceptionally useful, especially when I do text critical work, which I find I end up doing more than I would imagine I do. Imagine I would have done. So I found that text criticism to be one of the most valuable skills I ever learned at university. It was well worth doing. It was difficult. It was very, very difficult, but I also learned a lot and have a greater handle now on the Old Testament texts because of it. So again, it's a great. I would use the Samaritan Pentateuch to try to figure out what the original reading of the text was, along with the Septuagint and the Masoretic text, and then you throw in the Dead Sea Scrolls too. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's an interesting question. Okay, and our fourth question is, I'm only going to be able to touch on this one, okay, because there is a lot of stuff here, and it's from Roham Samuel, and he asks, what is the essence of Yahweh? Would you say his essence is God, Elohim? Yeah, probably. How is his essence one if there are other gods? Okay. It comes down to what is the definition of God. Also, he says, please explain what essence and person mean when used for God. Now, this is where you're going to have to sort of lean back onto the church fathers, and they're not going to give you exactly satisfactory answers all the time here. But they would explain a person as a hypostasis, a personality, an individual will, or emotional center, that sort of thing. Okay. although there's no center in God. So, because we don't want to get into partialism. Okay, so the essence is basically the wholeness of God, his oneness, his basically his immensity. That's what theologians would do. It's his immensity. That would be his essence. His personalities, his persons within that essence are the hypostases. Okay? I think it's Isaiah 44:6, where it talks about, thus says the Yahweh of Yahweh, King of Israel, and his Redeemer, the Yahweh of hosts. Two Yahwehs, one God. And it says there, I am the first, I am the last, besides me there is no God. So you have two Yahwehs claiming to be the one God. Now, the context here would reveal that the one essence here is the grand God, the big God, the big G God, as it were. But the word God in most ancient Near Eastern lexemes, whether you talk about Egypt, whether you talk about Mesopotamia, whether you talk about even Israel, it's pretty vague. And a god can be anything, practically, from a human judge to a nasty spirit to, say, one of the watchers, one of the ancient gods of antiquity. And when we talk about ancient gods here, we're not talking about like Elohim as in like Yahweh, the big god. We're talking about principality or power, essentially. Basically, a vastly powerful being that's not infinite in any way, shape, or form. Okay, so there's a lack of that immensity with the other gods. But the gods are a very vague term. It's a vague term. In Egypt, every spirit was called a Netcharu. Demons were called Netcharu. Little imps were called Netcharu. So, a Netcher is just the generic word for God or spirit. So, Elohim, the plural, not the magnificent plural, but the simple or common plural, is like that. A common plural is basically when a noun is, when you turn it into a plural form, it means more than one object. One or more of that noun. In Hebrew, we also have a magnificent plural, which is basically it's plural in form, but it means something that has been magnified. There's a text that calls King David the Melech. He's not many kings, he's one king, but he's the great king. And that's because oftentimes instead of using like very something or other, they will multiply it. We see the angels say this, holy, holy, holy. Well, the triple holy means that it's the utmost holiness. Very holy. Elohim, in the magnificent plural, is that he is not just a god, but he is the magnificent plural of God, or the greatest God. So we have to keep that distinction too. So there we do find this in both. But we have to maintain that distinction between what is the magnificent plural of Elohim versus what is the common plural. And the common plural is not a god in essence. It is just a god in name. But it is still a powerful being. All right? So that's going to just really touch on this. You could talk for hours just on this subject alone. So there's no way we can encompass this subject in its totality. There's a lot of historical thought involved in this subject. The church fathers paid heavily on this. There's a lot going on here. So we can only touch on this really, really briefly. So anyway, thank you for the question, and I hope that answered your question, at least to some respect. All right, we can get now into the super chats. Our first super chat comes from 501 Mobius for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. The boundary of Canaan given by Genesis 10:19 and the promise of it to be given to the descendants of Abraham by Genesis 17:8. The borders of the promised land given to Moses is different. Numbers 34, 3-12. Why is it? Okay. Let's talk about the boundary of Canaan. I'm going to put our Bible here. We are going to go into Genesis 10:19. And the territory of the Canaanite extended from Sidon as you go towards Gerar as far as Gaza. Okay, so south of Lebanon, basically. So as you're getting to Lebanon, and then goes down as far as Gaza. As you go towards Sodom and Gomorrah and Adamah and Zeboim as far as Lasha. So you go east, and you're on the other side of the Jordan River, essentially, in what's today modern Jordan. Okay? So, that's the territory of the Canaanite. Now, Abraham's promise is 17:8. And I will give to you and your descendants after you the land of your sojourning, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Okay. Now let's go to Numbers. Numbers 34. And let's go 3-12. Your southern sector shall extend from the wilderness of Zin along the side of Edom. Okay. So that's basically the Judean foothills as it goes sort of elbows down into the Sinai. Your southern border shall extend to the end of the Salt Sea eastward, the Salt Sea being the Mediterranean. Or sorry, not Salt Sea, the Dead Sea. Then your border shall turn direction from the south and ascend to Akrabim and continue to Zin, and its termination shall be the south of Kadesh Barnea. It shall read Hazaradar and continue to Asmon. The border shall turn direction from Asmon to the Brook of Egypt. Now, the Brook of Egypt is the Wadi Arish. Okay? And the Wadi Arish is this huge wadi system, which is a seasonal river that covers like 2/3 of the Sinai. So you're not going to get very deep into the Sinai before you start hitting the Wadi Arish. From the Aswan to the Brook of Egypt, and its termination shall be at the sea. And the termination of the Wadi Arish is roughly sort of midway across the Sinai on the northern coast of the Sinai Peninsula. As for the western border, you shall have the Great Sea, that's the Mediterranean. That is its coastline. This shall be your west border. And this shall be your north border. You shall draw your borderline from the Great Sea to Mount Hor. You shall draw the line from Mount Hor to Lebo-Hamath. And the termination of the border shall be at Zeded. And the border shall proceed to Zifron, and its termination shall be at Hezer Anan. And it shall be your north border. For your eastern border, you shall draw a line from Hazar Anan to Shepham, and the border shall go down to Shephan to Riblah, to on the east side of Ayin. And the border shall go down and reach the slope of the east side Sea of Cinnereth. And that's essentially the Sea of Galilee. And the border shall go down to the Jordan, and its termination shall be at the Salt Sea. And this shall be the land according to the borders all around. Okay. So, what we do find in this description is roughly the Judean foothills, and it also encompasses the coastal plain. Now, it's a little in some ways it's very, very similar, and in some ways it's different than what we find in Genesis, say, 10:19. Now, the difference in 10:19 is it's probably a little further, the northern border is a little further south. And in the case of the south, you basically have it, say, a little more westward so that it excludes Edom. Now, what happened between Abraham and Moses? Okay? And this is really important. The Philistines. The Philistines get to Israel first. Okay? They get there first. So while the land on the coastal plain is ultimately promised to Israel, it doesn't actually, it's not able to actually secure it. All of Lebanon basically becomes part of the Sea People's holdings, and very securely so. The Edomites basically drive out the Ishmaelites and the Canaanites that were resident around Seir, and they establish their own kingdom there. And God tells them, hey, don't mess with the Edomites. Don't mess with Edom, don't mess with Moab, don't mess with Aram. These are also sons of Abraham. These are part of Abraham's inheritance. So those people, those three tribes also are of Abraham's descendants, also basically cut out pieces for themselves. And as posterity of Abraham, those are kept as part of Abraham's inheritance. So while the promise is made to Abraham, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Israelites get all that land. They don't. Because some of it goes to some of Abraham's other descendants also. So that is very important consideration here. Moab gets a piece, Aram gets a piece, and Edom gets a piece. So, Israel doesn't get the whole pie, doesn't get all of Canaan, but it does get perhaps the best part of it. And eventually, they'll get the coastal plain too. It'll take a long time. It won't actually happen during the time of the biblical canon. That'll happen in the 20th century, where Israel also gets the coastal plain. But that's the modern borders today are actually a lot closer to the Abrahamic promise than, say, what Moses receives in the people who enter into the land received during their time, during the Joshua and the Judges. Okay. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. It's an interesting question. It's a good question. And that's because, again, there's a lot of factors at play. There's the Philistines. There's the Edomites. There's the Moabites. And, they're all taking a piece of the pie. And frankly, some of this, too, is because of Israel's disobedience. You have to also remember that. Some of this is they just can't take it. They can't take it because they were disobedient. This happens to, for example, the tribe of Dan. They're supposed to go to the far north and take their inheritance. They can't secure it because they're already falling into idolatry. So, yeah, it's not a good start. Not a good start. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it, and I hope that answered your question. Okay. Our next super chat is from Brick Creations for $10. Hi, Dr. Falk. Just curious. In Hebrew, does a consonant that ends with an A sound, as in A, that is next to a hey, so te plus hey, always make the O sound, toe? why would Elohim be Elohim instead of Elohem? Okay. It's an interesting question. And when I took Hebrew, the one thing he said, my Hebrew instructor said, is when it comes to ancient languages, don't ask why. Okay. That is a very unsatisfying answer. Unfortunately, we don't know why certain verbal construction or vowel constructions were used in some places and not necessarily others. Now, in the case of Elohim, we've got a little more idea why it's Elohim. And that is because you have a helper vowel in there. That vowel, because in the case of Elohim, if you didn't have that helper vowel there, it should be Elhim. You know, in normal, say, Hebrew syntax, you'd probably want to stick a schwa in a vocal schwa in there to sort of help the vowel connect to the next syllable. Because anything long like that would normally have sort of a break in there. But the O is there to sort of give the construction sort of an assist. Now, why the O? I don't know. It's what they chose. You can't explain everything like this. And you know, a Hebrew linguist might know a better answer to this question. Honestly, comparative Semitics is not my strong suit, and I got to make that really clear. There are truly experts on the Hebrew language that might know these fine details as to because they're asking the questions. They're asking these questions of why does this happen with this combination of letters. I just don't ask those questions. I'm not that curious about Hebrew to ask those questions or look it up. So frankly, I don't know the answer. Pure and simple, I don't know the answer because it's just not an area that where I have a lot of interest. You know, sometimes I know some of these answers because I have encountered them in other languages, but in this particular case, it seems like it's a helper vowel, but that's probably the best I can answer that. But I don't know if I'm correct. There might be actually a really good reason why, and I just don't. So anyway, I want to thank you for the super chat. It's an interesting question. I just don't happen to know the answer. But somebody who does do comparative Semitics might know the answer. And well, I do know there are some people on our channel that do comparative Semitics, and maybe one of them can answer that for you. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Hey, the next super chat is again from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Could Sia Xerxes Zares II be Darius the Mede in Daniel 5:31? Okay. The whole naming of Sia Zares II is very controversial. He's almost as he's almost as controversial as the whole Darius the Mede thing. Now, the more I look into this issue, the more I think that because there is some evidence supporting a potential Cyaxares II, whereas we don't have much except the Bible for Darius the Mede. I'm starting to lean a lot more towards Donald J. Wiseman's view on these things. And basically, what Wiseman suggested was that in some cases that these kings had multiple names, depending on what kingdoms they had conquered. Like, for example, Tiglath-Pileser III is also called Pul. P-U-L. I'm I'm much more leaning towards Wiseman's idea that Darius was a Mede name for Cyrus the Great. Now then, who then is Cyaxares II? I'm not really sure, honestly. It is suggested that he reigned between, it was a king in Babylon between, say, Cyrus and the predecessor there, but nobody's really sure. It's even possible that Cyaxares II was a second name for another, say, Persian king. So difficult to say. Difficult to say. We don't have enough information here, and in order for us to be more confident about this answer, we need a lot more information. We just don't have it. But I am uncomfortable with the whole idea of, say, linking two controversial names together to try. I don't think that makes the case stronger. Linking a controversial name with another controversial name doesn't make it stronger, it sort of makes it weaker. So I'd like to keep the two separate and basically try to figure out what's one and what's the other before we actually go on and try to theorize anything, because then you start getting into sterile conjecture, and I don't like sterile conjecture. Mr. Empty Conjecture may be a great photogenic puppet, but I just don't like doing it. Okay, well, thank you very much for that super chat. Appreciate it. Again, we just don't know. Not enough information. Okay, our fourth is from, again, Recreation for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Some full preterists say Isaiah 65:20 means that the resurrection can't be physical because people still die in the New Jerusalem. How can we refute this? Boy, full preterism is just the gift that keeps on giving. It's the thing with the New Jerusalem is there is a newer Jerusalem, and then there's a new heavens and new earth, New Jerusalem. Okay. I mean, full preterism, denying the resurrection is just, it's untenable on all angles. If the resurrection isn't physical, it's not a resurrection. It's just Christian Halloween, and we're walking around as spooks. Woo! No. Yeah. I'm just not. I'm just not buying that. I mean, we're resurrected like Christ, or we're not. If Christ is the only one to have a resurrected body, then there's no conquering of death. That's deeply, deeply problematic if you're a Christian, because that is the eternal hope, is the conquest over death, sin and death. If you don't have the resurrection of, us, do you have the resurrection of Jesus Christ? Does the resurrection of Jesus Christ make any sense? I mean, the whole New Jerusalem thing aside, this is going to be complete baloney, and it makes a pig's breakfast of the completed work of Jesus Christ. And I think this is why full preterism just errs into the side of heresy, because the implications of it are just so bad. Now, partial preterism doesn't have this problem, but it has its own problems. Full preterism, yeah, it's anathema. It really is anathema. We will take a little look, though, at Isaiah 65, though, just to make sure we dot all our I's properly here. Isaiah 65:20. All right. look back a little bit. All right, so verse 17. For behold, I create new heavens and new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come to mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in what I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem for rejoicing and her people for gladness. I will also rejoice in Jerusalem and be glad in my people, and there will no longer be heard in her the voice of weeping and the sound of crying. No longer will there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his 100 days. For the youth who will die at the age of 100, and the one who does not reach 100 shall be thought accursed. Okay. This is essentially, I mean, it's not saying that there'll necessarily be death, but that people will live to such great lengths and, basically have everlasting life that, for the youth will die at age 100 is just a sign that this is how long eternity starts to be. Oh, you're only 100? You're just a young pup. You're just a young pup. And the one who does not reach age 100 shall be thought accursed. Now, there are some people who suggest that this is actually part of the millennial kingdom, that this is the new Jerusalem. Not necessarily, or it is a sort of a taste leading up to the new heavens and the new earth, where eternal life is forever. It's eternal. And, there are those who do suggest that, people do still have the choice to sin and to fall and to, die as a result. So, we have to be really careful because this is prophetic. This is prophetic literature. Not everything is always quite as it seems in prophetic literature. When you're dealing with the prophets, you have to remember, it's a form of poetry. It's a form of condensed language. It's going to say things that might lead you to think that it's saying one thing when it's really saying something else. And for this, we'd have to sort of look at it in its sort of contextual form as well to see, where does the couplet lie? What's it being compared to? Now, in this particular case, say verse 20, the looks like you have a complete set of couplets in just that one verse. No longer will there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his years. For the youth will die at the age of 100, and the one who does not reach the age of 100 shall be thought accursed. Okay. Well, if it's 100, is it really a youth anymore? That's older than basically the oldest people. So it's supposed to give you that contrast here. The contrast is not death. The contrast here is immortality. If you die, you miss the boat, essentially. Somewhere along the way, you miss the boat. So this does seem to sort of allude to that this might have a fulfillment that occurs, say, during the millennial kingdom as well as in the new heavens and new earth as well. So, again, you have to take this prophecy on a very sort of circumspect basis, because you can't really know the fulfillment of prophecy until it is fulfilled. And that's the problem here, is we're sort of trying to second guess prophecy here from the wrong end of the telescope. We're sort of looking at it from, into the future, and we're not really good at seeing the future. The future evades us. So, but I think the main refutation here doesn't come from this verse. The main refutation has to come from the resurrection. Because if there's no resurrection for human beings, that puts into whole doubt the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And without the resurrection of Jesus Christ, there's no conquering of death. There's probably no redemption from sin. And, this is one of the reasons why, the church has always stood to say, hey, it's the resurrection of the body and the second coming of Jesus Christ. Full preterism denies both. It denies the second coming, it denies the resurrection of the dead. And with that, the completed work of Jesus Christ. That's the angle you have to take when engaging full preterism. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, our next super chat again comes from Recreation for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do you think near-death experiences could be supernatural phenomena, or that they have experienced part of the afterlife and then their consciousness returns back to their body? Ooh. 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 Impossible to say. There are accounts of, I think I've mentioned this book, it was called Specters of the Living. Okay? Basically ghostly manifestations from people that were still alive. There's actually many accounts of people seeing the spirits of those people who are still alive. So I don't want to rule out the possibility that one's consciousness can't leave the body and then return. Possible. How likely is, I don't know. And how likely is it when connected to near-death experience? Again, really hard to say. This is, again, an area of ongoing research. There's just so much here that has to be unwrapped. It's a difficult topic. It's a really difficult topic, especially when you start trying to use retroductive reasoning. Essentially, that's what's going on here. Is you're going to have to, in order to try to explain this, you have to use retroductive reasoning. And essentially, you go back and you say, what was the world be like for this experience to be true? And that could lead you into a variety of places. It could lead you into the idea that, hey, consciousness does leave the body and then come back. But you're going to need evidence for that. And it's obtaining that evidence that's always really difficult. So, again, that's just sort of the part of my thought processes regarding this. Ultimately, I don't know. The only thing I can say is they're not actually dead yet. They're not clinically dead at this point. If it's a near-death experience, the key word here is near. Not totally, completely, utterly dead. Almost dead. Little bit of Princess Bride there. Yeah. So I would say that it's possible. Possible. Is it likely? Don't know. I would need more evidence before I could say definitively. Okay, so thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that gave some insight into the question, and I hope that actually gave you something interesting to think about regarding this question. So, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I hope everyone out there is staying cool, by the way. Just in case you see me sweating here, like it's dripping off my face. Yeah, it's really hot right now in Vancouver, and it's like 90 degrees for like our American viewers, and it is really humid, exceptionally humid. So I'm just dying here. I'm drinking lots of water and iced tea, but it's really nasty weather right now. Okay, our next super chat again is from Brick Creation for $5. Totally off topic. Have you heard of Yacon syrup? It's a sweetener that has a glycemic index of 1. No, I have not heard of this. Should I have heard of this is more the question. What is Yacon syrup? I'm going to look this up on a browser here because I have never heard of this. Yacon syrup. Um. Okay. Yacon. Okay, so it's a sweetening agent from a tuberous root. Um. Made an evaporator, like maple syrup. Uh. Okay. Well. No, I've never heard of it. I'll have to take a look at it. Contains up to 50% fructooligosaccharides. Ooh. Yeah, it contains about 35% free glucose. So that would not be something I could eat. That for me is a lot of fructose. Um, that would be more fructose than I probably would eat in a week. So yeah, I would probably have to give that one a miss. So an interesting suggestion, but I don't eat stuff that's high in any sort of sugars. So I avoid a lot of sugar substitutes because of this. Like maltose, which is a sugar. Dextrose, I'll tend to avoid. A lot of like maltitol, I'll avoid. There are. Can you get rid of that? Yeah. Okay. All right. So, yeah, I'm again. It's Yacon has 35% fructose. Again, I couldn't that we wouldn't be able to eat that. So, but interesting. I'd never heard of it, and it's always interesting to find about these food substitutes because, for someone like me who has to manage my diabetes with by diet, I do look for new things that to try. So anyway, thank you for the suggestion. Very much appreciate it. Okay. The MRB for $2. Thoughts on 1 Corinthians 11, 3-6. Well, let's the Bible. I think I know which one this is. This is the one that's going to get me into trouble with the 6% of my female audience. Or the 6% of my audience who happens to be female. Okay? So, I want to thank you in advance for getting me into heaps and heaps of trouble for this question. But let's read it anyway. Okay. Verse 3 of 1 Corinthians 11. But I want you to understand that Christ is the head of every man, and the head of every man, the head of the, and the man is the head of a woman, and God is the head of Christ. Every man who has something on his head while praying or prophesying disgraces his head. But every woman who has her head uncovered while praying or prophesying disgraces her head, for she is one and the same with her whose head is shaved. For a woman, if a woman does not cover her head, let her also have her hair cut off. But if it is disgraceful for a woman to have her hair cut off or her head shaved, let her cover her head. For a man ought not to have his head covered, since he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of man. For man does not originate from woman, but woman from man. For indeed man was not created for woman's sake, but woman for man's sake. Therefore, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. However, in the Lord, neither is woman independent of man, nor is man independent of woman. Okay. There is a lot in that passage. And you want me to provide thoughts on this? Dude, you could write like a huge chapter and a commentary just on this passage. Um, there are so many issues in here, and I'm not going to cover them all. I'm not going to cover the most controversial ones. if you're just trying to get me in trouble with this, okay. But let's talk about some of the text, okay? Because I think there are some interesting things here. Now, one of the things about the text is it is using something that is culturally contextual to communicate something more important. The specifics of head covering is something that was individual to certain areas in Judaism and the Roman Empire. It was by no means universal. So this is something that's very, very particular to a certain time and place in the New Testament period. Now, you'll notice here, verse 5, but every woman who has her head uncovered while praying or prophesying disgraces her head. Now, notice here, women are praying and prophesying. They're prophesying. Okay. During service. Okay, this is not a home to their children. These women are prophesying in public. Second of all, in this particular passage, the woman has her head covered. Now, modern day Judaism, it's the opposite. Modern day Judaism, it's the man who covers his head. Again, a cultural context here. Okay? So, modern Judaism, it's the man who covers his head. In this particular context, it's the woman. So, this is not universal, and it's not eternal. These are sort of man-made rules that change over time. But the importance here that he's trying to use this cultural context for is the whole idea of authority. You know, who is under the authority of whom? You know, even Christ is under authority. You know, he's under the authority of the Father. Every man is under the authority of Christ. And women, if they are married, they are under the authority of the husband. Now, those rules have much been relaxed with, say, the 1960s. Okay? So people don't take that responsibility anymore. But there is still a responsibility, and people do benefit, say, in a home situation where the man is taking a leadership role to be spiritually the head of their house. You know, be the person who knows the Bible inside and out. And of course, the Second Temple period Judaism, this would have been almost a no-brainer. This is why you had shivas, you had peripatetic preachers like Jesus Christ, you know, preachers that wandered and taught students so that they could make young men fit for marriage, essentially. So this was a common prevailing view in ancient Judaism. So this is not shocking. This is not shocking. The man was expected to sort of step up the plate and know his Bible, his Old Testament if he was Jewish. Amongst Christian, he was expected to know his Bible if he was, a Christian head of his house, the Old Testament and New Testament. So that's really what it's driving at here, is that there's a responsibility of headship that the man has to take on. It's just using a cultural artifact to demonstrate it. And it gives you verse 7 here that verse 9, sorry. For indeed, man was not created for woman's sake, but woman for man's sake. Okay, this is a reference to creation, essentially basically saying that this is a universal thing. It's an eternal thing. It's something that comes out of creation itself. Finally, verse 11. And I think verse 11 is really important here. Because this is really sort of the denouement of this passage. People love going into the, oh, man needs to be head of the home. No. Yeah. Although there was that money changers thing. Verse 11. However, in the Lord, neither is woman independent of man, nor man independent of women. A woman, okay. There's the rub. You need her, and she needs you. It's an equal. Okay. We're got a spam problem, so please take care of it. Gonna have to be more attentive. Okay. All right. So, there's that interdependency between both man and woman. And that interdependency is really showing us here that this is a hierarchy of responsibility, not a hierarchy of authority. And that's a really, really important distinction. Man as a head over a woman is assuming more responsibility, but not necessarily more authority. So, men, you're responsible. Your job to teach the Bible. And look, I know there's a lot of men out there who don't know the Bible as well as their wives. That's not an excuse for you not to get better at it. You need to get better at this. You need to get better at this so you can properly manage your home. So you can express biblical wisdom. So you can have the answers when your children say, hey, Daddy, why did David pick up 5 stones when he went to go slay Goliath? You need those answers. Where was the Reed Sea? All this, you need to know your Bible. You need to know your Bible. And that's really what 1 Corinthians 11 is saying, that there is a responsibility to as head of the home. But that doesn't mean you have the rule of the tyrant. You're not a tyrant. You're a shepherd. Shepherd? You are you have been given souls to take care of, to mentor, to nurture, to grow. Your wife is a soul to mentor, to nurture, to help grow. Your children are souls that need to be mentored, nurtured, and grown. So they can go off and make more Christians. Teach the Bible also to their families. Well, now everyone wants to know why he picked 5 stones. Well, he may have missed. He had also some brothers. We know that Goliath had brothers. So presumably, the 5 stones were first of all, they probably it was only practical to carry 5 anyway. We have to understand that those stones were about, the size of small baseballs. They were, big suckers. They're not little tiny itty bitty stones. They're baseball sized rocks. Yeah, it's worse than a baseball, yeah. But, yeah. Like being hit by a small cannonball. Yeah, not fun. Okay. So we got those questions answered. Anyway, the Mr. B, thank you very much for the super chat. That's as much trouble as I want to get into tonight. And I appreciate you throwing me under the bus, as always. Okay. Our next super chat is from... oh, I did not change that. A second here. There we go. All right. It's from Angel VWN for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, I just finished reading the book of Joshua. Now moving on to the book of Judges. Is there anything I should be aware of or anything to keep in mind? Absolutely. Glad you asked. Both Joshua and Judges are arranged in a certain order to teach something. And that order is from best to worst. In Joshua, it's arranged as according to the 12 tribes. The good tribe, it starts with the good tribe, which is the tribe of Judah. Ends with the bad tribe, tribe of Dan. Does the same thing in Judges, but it goes from, again, 12 judges, good judges, to bad judges. Okay? The book of Judges and Joshua, the books of Judges and Joshua are not written in chronological order. They're written in a kind of parallel order. Okay? So these are episodes that overlap with each other chronologically. So you can't read it as if it was a single story narrative. You're going to get through your first judge and think, oh yeah, he's pretty good. But it doesn't mean the second one is following immediately after. The second judge, he's a little worse. He's still a good judge, but he's okay. By the time you get to Samson at the end, the last judge, he's a dreadfully bad judge. Terrible judge. Oh, he's a real stinker as a judge. Worst judge Israel had was Samson. Narcissistic, self-absorbed. He's a fool. He's a fool. But God still uses him, even though he's a fool. Yeah, he doesn't benefit, but, he doesn't care. Samson doesn't care that he doesn't benefit out of his foolishness or his service. He's all about him. I mean, even his very last act of toppling the temple onto all the Philistines was really an act of spite. It was really an act of spite. So, yeah, you gotta keep that in mind when you read the book of Judges. You're reading from good judges to bad judges. And once you sort of get past that midway point, the bad judges get pretty bad pretty fast. So there's something you should definitely keep in mind when you read Judges. So when you get to, start getting into the points of Jephthah, yeah, it's pretty clear you're in a bad judge already. I mean, Jephthah was number 9. 9 out of 12 judges. He was pretty awful. I know. Early Exodus daters want to lionize Jephthah, thinks he's a great, wonderful, saintly judge. He wasn't. He was a terrible judge. Absolutely awful judge. It was a huckster, con man, hung out with empty men. It was just, bad judge. Bad judge. No honeycomb for you. All right. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. It's a great book. Absolutely wonderful book. You'll really enjoy it, especially now that you can start seeing the structure of the book. You'll have a great time reading it now that you kind of can see now, oh, this judge isn't as good as the last one. Oh, this one's even worse. Oh, this guy's awful. Okay. So enjoy reading it because it is actually a really good book. All right. Now we're on to the Twitch. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay, on to the Twitch ones. Okay. Up at the top here. Okay. Okay, Frog Paste for $30. Thank you very much for that really generous super chat. Thoughts on 2 Kings 1935. Any records of 185,000 Assyrians being killed or dying by other means, such as disease, while besieging Jerusalem? Okay, now we do find that we have actually several historical documents that talk about the siege of Jerusalem under Sennacherib. And all of them are sort of very circumspectly written. They sort of dancing around certain issues. The Bible is the only one that records that 185,000 Assyrians died. Okay. Now, the presidency of Sennacherib, he's going to record that, well, I had Hezekiah trapped like a bird in the cage. Oh, and then I just returned to Assyria without a second thought. Okay. No, we achieved the moral victory. Yeah, it's starting to sound. If it sounds Putin-esque, it's because it is. Putin isn't the only one to claim a secondary objective victorious and after your main plans fail. So yeah, Sennacherib did this too, and we don't exactly know why. Sennacherib doesn't record why he returns from Jerusalem. He basically he doesn't breach the city. He doesn't breach the city. He doesn't come back with tribute. It's really strange. He kind of alluded, well, he's now my vassal. That was really basically what he said. Well, Hezekiah is now my vassal. But he's not coming back with any wealth. Okay. Because the Assyrians would put that in. They would actually describe if they got lots of wealth. I mean, Shalmaneser III did this. When Jehu comes and brings his tribute, they record that on the Black Obelisk. Some of the items that Jehu brings, as tribute. We don't see that with Sennacherib. Oh, he's a bird in a cage. Now he's our vassal. I'm coming back empty-handed. But he's my vassal. So, there is a certain amount of spin happening here. And again, we don't know exactly why. Why this happened. Or how the disease sort of, if it was a disease, how it took his men, was it dysentery across the camp? Was it cholera? Was it pneumonic plague? We have no idea. We have no idea. So again, there isn't a lot of information here, even though we have probably more texts describing this one siege than any other biblical event in the Old Testament. It's probably the best described event in the Old Testament. And yet, it still has a lot of open questions attached to it. So, my thoughts are that, yeah, I think he did lose a substantial part of his army. I think it was probably something like pneumonic plague. Because plague did happen within armies. And something like pneumonic plague would kill very fast, very quickly, and you'd wake up one morning and you would see a field full of corpses. However, again, we don't have everything. We need to fully assess this, but again, it's not inconsistent with the biblical narrative either. So, yeah. He might have had Hezekiah trapped like a bird in a cage. Doesn't mean he was able to get him out of the cage. He goes back to Assyria. Okay, yeah, he's calling Hezekiah his vassal. Does he come back with any tribute? No. No goodies. No king in chains. It's a pretty hollow victory. If this is Sennacherib's victory, it's pretty darn hollow. It's not a great victory. And if he had lost a huge number of his men, it would have probably ended up costing him the throne too, eventually. And we do know that Sennacherib is eventually assassinated by his sons. So, he wasn't a popular guy with his kids. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very generous super chat, and very much appreciated. And it's a good question too. He adds right after this. I'm just going to take this up. He also adds, Dr. Falk, I watched your lie in April for the first time. You were right. Absolutely heartbreaking. Oh, yeah. Totally. The story was great, the music was incredible, and the ending hit me harder than I expected. Oh, yeah, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Yeah. Yeah, I was crying like a little girl after that. Excellent. It was an excellent series, very well done, completely heart-wrenching. I don't ever go through that again. It's like, oh, no. No. But it is a great anime series. Absolutely incredible anime series. All right. Our next super chat comes from the Mr. B for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thoughts on baptismal regeneration? Oh, you so want to get me in trouble today. Oh, I have created trouble in churches over this question. Can you believe he wants me to talk about baptismal regeneration? I got into really serious trouble with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod over this one. He asks, is baptism salvific directly or indirectly? Would you be willing to buy some Jordan R water for $59 a quart? Jordan River water. The answer's no. All right. Okay, let's get some serious answering here. Do I think that baptism is... Oh yeah, J.I. Packer had a very good answer to this question. Now, as some of you know, I was friends with J.I. Packer, and one of the things that Packer used to say was, baptism didn't save you, but it extended an invitation into the church. Okay? So that was his view on this. Now, a lot of churches are going to... your view on this is going to depend largely on your denominational leaning. Really, it comes down to that. Your Lutheran church, you're going to believe it is salvific. That it is the vehicle of grace. Phenomenological grace, but the vehicle of grace. That it's baptism that saves. If you are Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, you probably think something similar. If you're Protestant or an independent church or even fundamentalist, you'll probably say baptism doesn't save unless you are one of those baptism essentialists. And there are some out there. There are some sects of fundamentalism that believe that baptism is necessary for salvation and you cannot be saved unless you're baptized with exactly the right formula. Okay? So a lot of how you answer this question is going to depend on your denomination. Now, my personal thoughts on this, and don't shoot me, these are my personal thoughts. They neither represent... I'm not gonna die on this hill. I'm not gonna say this is the absolute truth. I'm not gonna call you a heretic if you disagree with me here. I'm not even gonna say you're wrong if you disagree with me here. Feel free to disagree with me here. Okay? So, what I think is, I don't believe in baptismal regeneration. Okay, I just don't buy it. I buy that it's baptismal regeneration insofar as it is the Holy Spirit regenerating. Okay? but I don't believe that is necessarily tied to the act of baptism itself, but to the act of salvation. When God saves you, the Holy Spirit starts to regenerate you. Now, that's my view on this. Again, you are free to disagree with me. All my Eastern Orthodox friends are going to disagree with me here. All my Roman Catholic friends are going to disagree with me here. All my Lutheran friends are going to disagree with me here, except for the Welsh people who've already anathematized me. So, okay, uh, so do I think baptism is salvific directly or indirectly? No. The thief on the cross was never baptized. He was never baptized. And yet, he's saved. Christ tells us he's saved. So, he was never baptized. Do I think baptism is important? Absolutely. Do I think that baptism is it's a necessary act of obedience? It doesn't save you. No work will save you. Yeah, I know the Lutherans are going to say it's not a work, it's an act of grace from God. Well, someone's still got to sprinkle you. Okay? Someone's still got to do it. Sacerdotalism just doesn't get you quite out of that. But that aside, I think it's a necessary act of obedience. It's how can you say you are a Christian but refuse the first act that you're told to do as a Christian? So I do think it is super important. I think baptism is very, very, very important. Okay? I also don't think it is salvific. But if your first act as a Christian is an act of disobedience, then you might want to question your salvation. Okay? You might still be saved, but you also might have some issues there with obedience that need to be brought to the Lord. I do think every Christian should be baptized, but it doesn't save you. That's my thoughts on this. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me. I know I'm going to get hate mail from the Eastern Orthodox. They'll call me heretics. The Roman Catholics are going to say, you nasty Protestant, you. The Lutheran churches are going to be up in arms, wanting to burn me at the stake. But that's my opinion. And I am not going to call you, say you're not a brother if you disagree with me. I think this is one of those areas we can... I know I would be... Yeah, and the Baptists are going to say, yeah, duh. Yes, there's always that, isn't there? Yeah, so... So anyway, that's my thoughts on this. Okay? So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very, very much appreciate it. And thank you for getting me into hot water twice today. And no, hot water is not a baptism. It's a bath. Okay. Our next super chat is from Sinaiacus Apologia for $100. Thank you very much for that really generous super chat again. You've been so consistent with helping us in this ministry, and we're so very, very grateful. Thank you so much for your loving kindness and your generous support of our ministry. We really, really appreciate it. Okay, he says, E.W. Bullinger and Dr. Michael Heiser both suggest that the Revelations 12 can be used to determine the birth date of Yeshua Jesus. Thoughts? I have my doubt, my reservations there. To Revelations 12. I would probably need something a little more specific than that to really sort of... Let me see if there's anything in here that just sort of screams out that it would be any indication. All right, the woman fled and she gave birth to a son, a male who is to rule all nations with honor, and her child was caught up with God to his throne. Okay, I'll start verse 3. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, the great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns. Don't see anything here that would really suggest that the birth date of Christ. He was nourished for 1,260 days. Unless I'm missing something here, which is very possible, I don't see anything specifically in this. Wings were given to the woman in order she went fly in the universe. She was time and a time and a half. Yeah, I don't. I need something a little more specific here. I just. Oh, okay. They're talking about constellation alignment. Ah, oh wow. Okay. Yeah, now I know where they're driving at now. Okay, that constellation alignment. Another sign appeared in heaven, a great red dragon. Okay, so they're equating these signs to constellations. Oh boy. I have huge problems with archaeoastronomy. Okay. Oh boy, do I have problems with archaeoastronomy. Egyptology has a long history of people dabbling into archaeoastronomy. The date suggested by them, he adds to his question here. Yeah, the date suggested by them, by the way, is September 11th, 3 BC. Yeah, I have. Egyptology is full of people in the past trying to use alignments of stars and constellations to try to determine dates. And it's been an abject failure. Okay? The enterprise of archaeoastronomy sounds really scientific. It sounds incredibly scientific. Hey, you're using the stars. The stars are Newtonian. They move in the sky in a precise, predictable pattern. All we need to do is move it back. That's not so easy. Because when you start looking at stuff that such as human observations, there's such margins of error here in various observations that I think stuff like this becomes really, really problematic. I don't think you can come down to an exact date based upon constellation alignments. I think this is pseudoscience. I think this is really pseudoscience. And I think when you start actually going into it, I mean, you even need a reference point. And this is one of the things about this is you need a reference point to say, okay, this is where I'm making the observation from. This is the elevation I'm making the observation from. And we don't have that information here. You need that information as a reference point in order to accurately turn the clock back to see where the alignment is. And it can be off by years if those reference points are off by just the slightest amount. You know, a change of elevation of, say, 10, 15 feet can dramatically alter the results of an observation. We see this with the Sothic cycles. You know, for years, people were using the Sothic cycles to establish the date of, say, the high chronology of ancient Egypt. And then they discovered, hey, well, where are we taking that measurement? Where are they taking that measurement from? Nobody knew. Were they doing it on a platform? Nobody knew. Were they doing it from Memphis? Were they doing it from Thebes? Wow, those are very, very different locations and going to get you really different results. Were they, where did the cycle begin and where did it end? And it ultimately was exposed that the Celtic cycles for dating anything were practically worthless. They were practically worthless. That's the problem with archaeological astronomy. Is turning the clock back is so fraught with error, it's practically worthless. So I would take this date with the proverbial grain of salt, honestly. I wouldn't place any credence in it. Archaeological astronomy has such a bad history. There's really, even stuff that we would think that would be, like a no-brainer, like, say, solar eclipses. I think there's a famous, I think it is of Mercili II, or is it the third? I'll have to check here. Please keep Mercili II. Mercili II sees a solar eclipse just before one of his great battles. So, you've had many people try to date that. Well, they turned back the clock and they discovered, oh, well, there's more than one solar eclipse during his reign at right around exactly the same time. Was it in 1312? Was it in 1314? Was the one in 1318? Nobody knows. You can't figure it out. So it's really problematic. The whole archaeoastronomy thing, as I said, sounds scientific. It's not. So anyway, bring that back to the original super chat here. So anyway, those are my thoughts on this. I think Bullinger and Heiser here are expressing wishful thinking. I don't think you can predict. I don't think it's that useful. And if they do get a date that's in the range, well, okay, they would have had to get it somewhere in the range eventually. You do have a 3-year span there that it could a possible alignment could be in. Yeah, maybe, but that's assuming your reference point is consistent and known, and it's not. So anyway, thank you very much for that wonderful super chat. A good question too. Once I figured out what you were asking, thank you for the clarification. Also, that really helped to answer the question. And I really, really appreciate that question, and I really appreciate all the help you give this channel. Thank you so very much. Okay. Our next super chat is from Tom Lanchek for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. If you were in ancient Egypt and God commanded you to share the truth of Yahweh with the Egyptians, what would have been an effective evangelistic strategy? Oh. Well, Jonah's worked pretty good. Get swallowed by a whale, die, get choked up, and come back to life. Yeah, that was a pretty good evangelistic strategy. It might be hard to replicate, though. Just saying. And kind of a rough way to do it too. Wow. You're fighting an entire culture there. Okay? If you go back to ancient Egypt and you start to share Yahweh with the Egyptians, you're going to have all sorts of issues. There's the whole state cult issue. Every town's going to have its own gods. Every village has its own gods. You, as a private individual, as a private citizen in ancient Egypt, you could put your own gods up in your own shrine. And one of the things we find in Egyptian houses is there's a doorway, front doorway, but around the side is a stairwell that goes up to a private shrine on the outside. So every house had a shrine on the outside. Well, if I was a Yahweh worshiper in ancient Egypt, probably the first thing I would do is remove all the idols from that private shrine. And then you'd have people asking, oh, did you see this guy's house? It doesn't have any idols. What's going on here? That would be probably an effective way to start the conversation in say, ancient Egypt, is you do something countercultural. Maybe not something that disrupts the culture, but something that causes people to question so you can open up the conversation. Just like we would have, in modern, say, evangelistic techniques, you want to open up a conversation. Likewise, if you were transported back in time to the not so fun time of the ancient Egypt, you'd still want to have that conversation as well, but you'd start that conversation in a different way. Every house had idols. Hey, your house doesn't. So because your house doesn't have idols, that's going to cause a conversation. Now, in some places in the ancient world, that would get you killed. Like, for example, in Rome. If you did that in Rome, you would, again, they would accuse you of being an atheist, a good for nothing, and they would end up killing you. But ancient Egypt was more tolerant of this sort of thing. Because everyone had religious beliefs of some kind. If someone had an idiosyncratic religious belief, that just sort of went along with the culture. So you did have the option in the ancient world to not necessarily worship the royal cult. You didn't have to worship the royal cult in ancient Egypt. Kings did, because that was their selection, their options. But your average person, you might have had to, do some religious festival for the tribal god, for the god of the village. That might have been mandatory. But generally, private religious expression was up to the individual. So there was some freedom in Egypt for pursuing the gods of one's choice. Like, for example, if you were a Canaanite living in Egypt, you could worship Canaanite gods. No one had any problem with you worshiping Canaanite gods. You could worship El, you could worship Astarte, you could worship Resheph, Baal, they didn't care. So if you were to do Yahweh worship, clean out the idols out of your shrine, and that would be a great way to start. So anyway, interesting hypothetical question. Thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that was an interesting answer too. Very much appreciate the super chat. Okay. We've got a $10 Australian super chat from Sentinel Apologetics. Thank you very much. How's it going, Rob? Daddy Falk writing on Daniel 3, Fiery Furnace. Golden Gate says, burning is referred throughout the Babylonian, Persian, and Greek periods, but it has more substantial Egyptian background. Thoughts? Yeah. We do see fire motifs in, say, certain Egyptian works, like the Book of the Dead. One of the motifs that we find in, say, the Book of the Dead is if you're naughty and you don't make it out of a certain section of the Amduat in time and the doors close on you, you end up being thrown into a burning lake. A lake of fire, as it were. We do find these motifs in Egyptian religious thought. And the whole Egyptian religious thought is very, very complicated. Okay? But we do see it. And the Egyptians did use fire for both, say, as a motif of punishment, as well as a motif of purification. Like, for example, they will burn incense on a spoon to purify just about anything. So you want to purify the space before God, you take a spoon, set on fire some incense, and burn it in front of your idol. You didn't wash your hands after using the Bible? Oh, that's okay. Take some incense, set it on fire and move your hands through the smoke. Okay, you don't have to wash your hands anymore. Ew. People in Egypt still do this. Okay, people in Egypt still do this. Not commonly, okay, but they do still do this. So there is that idea that the smoke from something that's been burning has a purification effect. Many cultures throughout the ancient Near East. Now, I would recommend, if you are doing the fiery furnace, is to definitely reference the epilogue in my book on the Ark of the Covenant in its Egyptian context. Because in the epilogue, it actually talks about what those furnaces were used for. Okay? That particular furnace in Daniel 3 was used for the destruction of sacred furniture. Essentially, when the Babylonians decided to go on, basically, pillage some poor little kingdom somewhere, they would take back all the religious furniture that was covered in bronze, silver, gold, etc. They would put it in these furnaces, light the furnace on fire, burn all the wood out, and just sweep up the gold afterwards. That was the purpose of these furnaces, was the destruction of holy implements from other societies. That's what they did with these furnaces. That's why they're tall enough to stand in. Honestly, it's not that these are not for say the refining of, say, metals. It is not. These furnaces are too big to be practically useful for refining metal. They are a size large enough, though, to accommodate the largest piece of ritual processional furniture, which would have been like a sacred bark on a stand. So, because those pieces of furniture could be up to 6-7 feet, you needed a tall furnace to accommodate the height, so you could stuff as many of these things in, so that when they did burn and the metal did melt, that there was enough there to sweep up. So that's the purpose of these furnaces, was to provide a means for the Babylonians to destroy sacred implements, to recover the metal. And they would recover the metal so they could pay their soldiers, because that's how they paid their soldiers, was in weighed out metal. So anyway, I hope that contributed to your question here. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And it's really good to see you here tonight. Okay. Then we got Gospel to the Geek for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Was the Egyptian opening of the mouth ritual used to make idols, like the Mesopotamian version? Yes, it was. We do find the opening of the mouth used in actually a variety of situations for animal. Or was it for making mummies? That too. Also, does the creation of man allude to these rituals? Thanks. Okay. Yes. The short answer to the final question is yes, the creation of man does allude to these these rituals. Now, the opening of the mouth is basically a ceremony where, in its most basic, you've got a mummy, and it's all wrapped up. And what you do is you unwrap the mouth portion over the mouth, you open the mouth, and you place a spoon towards it. Okay? That's the opening of the mouth ritual. And it's supposed to allow the spirit of the dead to both re-inhabit the body, exit and leave the body, as well as allow the spirit to accept sustenance from the body that has now had its mouth opened. Okay? So that was the purpose of it. So it was applied to idols. So an idol could have the opening of the mouth ceremony applied to it, where basically that would then allow a spirit it would inaugurate the idol, essentially turn the idol from basically a hunk of stone or a hunk of metal, most of these metal actually, to the living flesh of the God, who can now accept the spirit of the God. Okay. So it was used on idols. It was also used on certain sacred furniture as well. We see it being used on the throne of Hatshepsut. While she's off and has a new throne made, they're doing the opening of the mouth ceremony to the throne. So it can accept her spirit as she, of course, walks in and sits down on her throne. Oh, you need to do the opening of the mouth for the throne to accept the spirit of this king, who just is basically taking a load off her feet. But, that was also applied to sacred furniture as well. So we do find the opening of the mouth used on shrines, palanquins, thrones, statues, even temples. The entire temples would have the opening of the mouth ceremony applied. It was one of those sort of universal ceremonies that you find all over in ancient Egypt. Okay? So it wasn't used for mummies alone, but it was used with mummies. Now, the idea here, because the opening of the mouth ceremony is that idea that you have a body, a lifeless body of some kind, whether it's a mummy, a statue, a shrine, whatever. And you are doing this ritual that causes the spirit to come in and out of it, or in and reside and stay for a while. There is an allusion to this in the creation of man, where God makes man from the clay, from the Adamah, and then breathes the living spirit in. So you are supposed to get that image that the mouth has been opened and it is received through the nostrils or the mouth. And the Egyptians believed that the spirit could enter either through the mouth or the nostrils, but the ceremony was done for the mouth explicitly. Okay? So, that's a very, very interesting question. I want to thank you very much for that super chat. That's a great question. Very, very interesting. Because we do find this in a lot of places in Egypt, and it does have implications for how we interpret, say, Genesis 1. So, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay. Mystery flavor for $20. Thank you very much for that very generous super chat. So grateful. Okay. Is there any archaeological or historical confirmation of the machines described in 2 Chronicles 26:15? Well, let's look at 2 Chronicles 20:15. 2 Chronicles 26:15. I'll start at 14 here. Pull up the Bible here. Moreover, Uzziah prepared for all the army shields, spears, helmets, body armor, bows, and sling stones. And Jerusalem he made engines of war invented by skilled men to be on the towers, on the corners, for the purposes of shooting arrows and great stones. Hence his fame spread afar, for he marvelously helped until he was strong. But when he became strong, his heart was so proud that he acted corruptly, and he was unfaithful to the Lord, for he entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. Definite no-no if you're king. All right. Now, the engines, the so-called machines of war, and the it's the text just here says Kishabon. And it's very vague. It's very vague. It's device, invention, engine, machine. It's very vague. Now, there had to be some cleverness to these. Because the text says that they were invented by skillful men. And I believe that should be Akma. Yeah. Sorry. job. So basically, thinking men. Thinking men. Um, and it was done in defense of the towers. Now, do we have any confirmation of these machines? Unfortunately, we don't. Okay. We don't have the remnants of this wall anyway. The Romans basically destroyed almost the entire wall of Jerusalem from this period. So we don't have that any remnants of these things that we can say, okay, this is what it would have been like, what it looked like. And we don't really have any descriptions from the ancient world either of what these would have been like. But, they could have been anything from, a chute designed to throw small boulders. I mean, that's a possibility. It's possible they were a kind of trebuchet, where you basically have sort of a lever system. That's possible as well, especially if they've imported, people to do these sorts of things. So, there's like, for example, we do find, for example, in, say, Greek literature, a variety of descriptions of different sort of devices that, say, the Greek states used. So, there was some cleverness into some of this stuff. Admittedly, some of it may not have worked exactly as described, but a lot of it adds some, at least minimal effectiveness in some way. So, if they had prepared, like, on the corners, chutes that could aim stones, or say, as I said, a trebuchet that on the towers would have thrown a stone a very long range. That's not beyond the realm of possibility here. Even for a civilization like an Iron Age civilization, like the Divided Monarchy. So, not out of the question. It's not out of the question. Shooting arrows, they could have made large boats. That wouldn't have been beyond, reckoning either. They had composite boat technology. All they'd have to do is just scale it up. So, we don't have any archaeological confirmation, but it's also not something that would be necessarily be inconsistent either with what we know of the time. We do have some siege towers that say the Assyrians built, that where they record some of their devices. So the Assyrians had some devices that were similar to sounding to this. That could be historical confirmation. I'd have to look up my copies of, say, the Nineveh reliefs to really see if I could find anything that's, say, comparable. But that would be a place I'd go looking. I would go looking into, say, the the Nineveh reliefs, and to see if there's something there that might look similar to some of these devices. Because Assyrians did do this as well. I mean, in the case of, say, siege works, like an invading army would use, they would be probably much more into this sort of thing because they'd have to overcome a big wall. So you'd want to have devices that hurl large stones. So if they have it offensively, it's very possible too that a city could be built that use these things defensively as well. It would also basically gum up the works when, say, a Sennacherib comes by also. And it could be a reason why his soldiers couldn't get that close. So, speculation here, but not necessarily the worst speculation either. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. I hope we at least, even if we couldn't give you a absolute answer here, I hope we could shed some light on the question, or at least make the question more interesting. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and it's great to have you here tonight. Okay, another one from Sentinel Apologetics here for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay, I'm sitting back and smiling about the Revelation 12 question. Basically, the alignment of Sun, Moon, and Virgo all point to September 5th BC. Let's discuss it. Oh, man. I'm just, yeah, I'm gonna have to say that this is, for me, this is just the whole idea of a lunar eclipse in Virgo. Uh, uh, this is much more speculative than I'm really want to get into. And again, once you start coming at this point, or sorry, a solar eclipse at this point, boy. Um, I mean, I hope. I don't even know what the percentage of this eclipse is, because I've seen some of these where it's been an awful reach. Like, for example, the whole idea that like, for example, most human eyes can't even pick out if the solar eclipse is less than, say, 96%. It'll go unnoticed most of the time. So, your friend's back. Okay, awesome. So, yeah, we're gonna have to discuss this offline, because I think there's going to need to be more details. And again, I'm not convinced. I'm really not convinced. I think a lot of this sort of this archaeoastronomy, I think, is seriously and frankly, the whole idea that you have. Frankly, you're also going to have to try to convince me also that there was a solar eclipse during the birth of Christ. That is going to be. That's a dodgy proposition. I mean, you wouldn't. That would be. We would find that in the Gospels. They talk about this little star in the sky, but they missed the solar eclipse? What? Huh? Um, yeah, I got some issues. Got some issues with this. I'm really doubting this. I'm really doubting this. Again, I think a lot of this archaeoastronomy is complete hokum. And yeah, there might have been an eclipse at that time. Maybe. But there's nothing saying it's a eclipse that is correlates to the birth of Christ. So again, we'll have to discuss this offline. We're gonna have to discuss this offline, because I need more. I need a lot more, and I'm gonna need some actual references in the gospel to this, because I've got some serious doubts. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. And that's it for the super chats. So let's go take some non-super chats. All right. Now I see Jade Mako's question. In the future, put a Q and a colon, because I would have just normally just skipped right past that. But I did notice it, so we're gonna take it. Okay, awesome. So yeah, in the future, just a Q and a colon, not a question and a colon. Otherwise, I would just ignore. But she asks, are noses chilled off many Egyptian statuary as a kind of reversal of the opening of the mouth ritual? All right. Oh boy, how do I say this? We have noses get removed from statuary for one of two reasons, essentially: vandalism or accident, and they both happen. A lot of things that are blamed as vandalism are actually accident. Essentially, You know, in the ancient world, people used to tear down statues to reuse the stone. When this statue fell, well, you know, the nose is the longest thing sticking out. It gets whacked off. Okay? So, yeah, there are times when, you know, someone throws this rock at a statue and takes off the nose. It's the easiest part to chip off of a face. Okay, so we do have those statuary that lose their nose just by sheer accident. The other reason would be because if it's intentionally chiseled off, it is to mar the look in the afterlife. That's essentially what it is. And it boils down to a kind of I would say a capital punishment. Okay, they did this as capital punishment in some cases, where a person's nose would be cut off. Now, if you ever go to a tombstone, okay, you ever go to tombstone, you know, the place of the OK Corral, you know, Doc Holliday, Wyatt Earp, Clantons. There's a museum there. With these old 19th century photographs of the various people there. And they showed a picture of a Native American woman who had her nose cut off because she had committed adultery in the tribe. Okay? It's really disturbing. It looks grotesque. You do not understand how much having a nose contributes to a person's looks until you see one that has actually had their nose removed. It's grotesque. It's meant to be grotesque. It's permanently disfiguring. That's what it's meant to be. And I think in some of the cases where these noses get chiseled off intentionally is as an attempt to permanently disfigure the person in the afterlife. So it's not a reverse of the opening of the mouth. It's a attempt to mar what the person looked like in the afterlife. So that's really what's going on when you see a chiseled nose. Now, granted, it's hard to sometimes tell which is which. Which is a chisel, which is an accident. Okay? And I think, I guess, again, you know, recently a lot of people were making big deals of the chiseled off nose, but you find it across so many statuary under so many different conditions. A lot of them had to be accidents. Like, for example, the nose is off on the Sphinx, the Great Sphinx. Okay, now that wasn't chiseled off on purpose. That just fell off. The Sphinx also had a beard and a statue in front of the beard. That also fell off. These statues sometimes have, well, you know, not the best stone, not the best workmanship. You know, there are times when, you know, despite the best efforts of craftsmen, stuff happens over time. You know, these statues have survived, you know, 3,000-4,000, sometimes up to 5,000 years. Stuff's going to happen to it in 5,000 years. Just the elements are going to take its toll. Accidents are going to take its toll. All sorts of things are going to take its toll. So we do have to be mindful of that. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's an interesting question, but that's sort of what's going on here. It's either accident or punishment of some kind. All right, we'll take another non-super chat now. Interesting. Okay, I'll take this one. from Innovati, and he asks, "How did Joshua's men start fires when they burnt cities? Flint? Other fire making methods? Oh, flint. Absolutely flint. You find flint all over the Levant and Egypt. For example, I found flint in Egypt. Okay, it's all over the Sinai. They would have had lots and lots of time to collect lots and lots of flint. Okay, so essentially, you get some flint, you get some straw. You know, because they're going to be using lots of flint along the way, because they're going to be making stone tools. Stone tools are often done out of flint. So they're not just using flint for making fires; they're using it for tools, for arrowheads, for razors, and axes. So they're going to be using all sorts of different flint implements. And it's a common enough stone, especially in the Sinai, that they would have had lots of access to it. They probably would have even gotten some assistance in how to actually work it, because we do see knapping sites, and that's the process of shaping flint, all over Sinai. So there definitely would have had ample supply of flint. That's not even an issue. As far as the rest of the fire making, they would just take chaff or wheat husks, and they could burn that. And that stuff like burnt like kindling. I mean, it was kindling. It was like wildfire. So after you had like bundles of sheaves of say straw or hay, throw that into a city, set it on fire. Yeah, the whole city was going to burn out fast. You take a rock, you cover it in tar and oil. Okay. Pitch and oil. Set that thing on fire. Launch it with a trebuchet. That's how they think that the city of Hatzor burned down. Was basically a flaming stone hit the oil supply for the king, and just set all that oil on fire. And the whole city went up like a candle, like a lamp, just burned. So that's generally how they would have made fires in Joshua's time. I mean, and the technology didn't really change for making fires until probably the 19th century. So, this is a tremendously long used method. For example, we still like in flintlocks. See, that's how they created a spark for the muskets, was with a piece of flint. So, tremendously useful technology was used in ancient times. You can still get flint kits to make fires in survival situations. So I wouldn't recommend it. If you have, carry a lighter, because it's a lot more reliable. But even your lighter has a flint in it. That's how you start the flame on a lighter, is with a flint. But we still use it today. Yeah, just in a more convenient package. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's an interesting question, which is why I took it. Okay, next question. Here. Okay, I'll take this from St. Ronan. I almost passed by it because the queue wasn't at the beginning. I need that queue at the beginning. So I almost skipped this one. So he says, "Good evening again, Dr. Falk. What's the difference between a book and a codex?" Okay. Oh, okay. Um, well, they are kind of synonymous terms in a sense. Okay. Um, all codices are books, but not all books are codices. Okay. Now, follow that very, very carefully. Okay. A book is a large literary composition. Okay. A codex is the material format it's published in. Now, in the ancient world, most books were written on scrolls. Okay? What the codex did was, instead of having a scroll, a book here took individual pages, sewed them along the edge, and put a cover on it. That's a codex. Almost every modern book today is a codex. That's the technical term for this. Is a codex. It's a bound set of pages. Okay? So a book in the ancient world could be either a scroll or a codex. Generally. Larger compositions wouldn't have been done on other writing implements, but you could conceivably put it on tablets too. But that's not very convenient. Library tablets would not. No. Yeah. There's but yeah. Generally speaking, that there is books in the ancient world generally broke down into those two categories, either the scrolls or codexes. Okay, and frankly, the first codexes were actually done on papyrus and date around the time of Julius Caesar. So it's almost just before the Christian era that we see the first codexes. Codices is the plural, I guess. So we see the first codices. And the problem with using papyrus and codices is that the edges tend to be very, very fragile. So pages tend to break over time and fall out. So papyrus was much better for scrolls than it was for codices. But parchment and vellum were ideal for codices because it was supple. It could bend easily without breaking. So that's why we find Codex Sinaiticus made out of parchment. Is because it was that parchment gave it the subtlety that it could be stitched into a codex really, really easily. So that's really the difference. Is not all books are codices, but codices are books. Hope that made sense. So a book is any long literary work. A codex is the format of bound pages that are stitched together. And a scroll is just a long, continuous sheet that's rolled up on one or both ends. So, anyway, thank you very much for the question, and it's an interesting question. Okay, here. Okay, K. Gould asks, parapsychology is considered among many to be a pseudoscience, and frankly, probably most of it is. What makes you take it to a legitimate? By the way, love these live chats. Well, thank you very much. Parapsychology as a science, I don't have a lot of stock in. Okay. The paranormal is a different matter. I take stock in. I think the paranormal is legitimate. I don't think parapsychology, as a discipline, is necessarily legitimate. And I think there's a very, very fine difference there. Parapsychology, and parapsychology very, very much varies amongst the practitioners too. You do find parapsychologists who will go. Some of them will be woo-woo New Age types that have no rigor at all. You'll have some that are incredibly rigorous, try to put a lot of thought into experimentation, try to look at confirmation bias and potential poisoning the well to get that would taint the results. They'll look at double blind, triple blind studies. So it varies. There's a spectrum here. Now, would I say that parapsychology as a discipline has been highly successful? No. I don't think anyone will claim that. It also hasn't been a complete failure either. And I think that's an important sort of distinction here, is that it has not been a complete failure. It has created some very interesting thought experiments. Some very, very interesting thought experiments. Like for example, they've come up with some very interesting thought experiments of, say, well, what would astral projection look like if it was real? And what kind of experiment could we come up with that would show it if it was real? Well, those thought experiments are the same sort of thought experiments that physicists have adapted for use in saying, okay, quantum weirdness, how do we know that a particle actually teleported when we do our quantum strangeness experiments? Well, they're adapting the parapsychology thought experiments for the analysis of, say, quantum entanglement. So, yeah, okay, parapsychology, not a great raving success. Also not a complete failure. But as far as the paranormal goes, why do I give the paranormal some legitimacy? Is because I've seen too much crazy crap. Okay, that's the reason. I've seen stuff that's just downright bizarre. And, the longer I live, the more bizarre it seems. So, I guess I've just been sort of tainted by my own experiences here. I've got a bias. I've got a bias towards my experiences. I mean, go figure. That's things I've seen personally. People have told me, people who I trusted have told me strange stuff that's happened to them. Strange stuff has happened to me. I take that seriously. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I take the strange stuff that happens to me more seriously. I'm a bit funny that way. Okay. But it also, what have seen, and have experienced doesn't contradict the Bible in any way either. In fact, everything I've seen and witnessed and experienced has been consistent with the biblical narrative. So, with that said, I'm glad you're enjoying the live chats. We do this as a service to the community, to our subscribers. And I hope you become a regular here, because we'd love to have you join the party every Friday. So thank you very much for the question. It's an interesting question. Hey. Skip past that one. We are getting close to the 3-hour mark here, so we're going to wrap this up very, very soon. Okay, I am actually going to take this and I'm not going to answer it. Okay, I'm going to take a question I'm not going to quite answer. Swiftly asks, what commentaries on Leviticus and Ezekiel would you recommend? I wouldn't recommend. I'm not going to recommend commentaries for you. What I'm going to recommend is there is a there were two books um, published, and I believe they were called um, something like the best commentaries, the best commentaries of the Old Testament and the best commentaries of the New Testament, and these are actually books. So basically, what these and I know the one for the Old Testament was done by Trimper Longman. I think the one for the New Testament was done by D.A. Carson. And what these are is essentially a bibliography of commentaries. So both these gentlemen, respectively, the one for the Old Testament, the one for the New Testament, are going through all the commentaries, and they write a paragraph summary of each commentary, basically saying why they like it, why it's so good, why it's so bad, strengths, weaknesses, and I would highly recommend those books. Okay, because you know, I could give you five recommendation of five commentaries from Leviticus and another five maybe from Ezekiel. But somebody then is going to just come along and ask me, well, can you give me five commentaries for Daniel? Can you give me five commentaries for the Book of Jasher? Okay. There's no commentaries for the Book of Jasher, by the way. Although there is one for First Enoch, which surprised the socks off of me. However, okay. The point is this. I don't want to give you a fish. I want to teach you to fish. Okay? So you get those two books, and then you've got then a resource that you can use for looking up commentaries on any book of the Bible. That opens up a whole new world to you rather than just giving you the fish. Now you can fish. So get those two books. And as I say, they're by Tremper Longman and I think D.A. Carson. And then you're off to a good start here on what constitutes good commentaries, why they're good commentaries, and you can go from there. So thank you very much for the question. I hope I answered it to your satisfaction. Okay. I take that one from Andrew Graham that just popped up. Why is the Red Sea in Exodus considered an error? Okay, because the translation is not Red Sea. Okay, um, it's an error in translation, not an error in the text. Now, the in the book of Exodus, the words used is Yam Suf, and Yam Suf is essentially means sea of reeds. And Suf is actually a loan word from the Egyptian tuf or tufi, which means reeds. Okay, and this is something that happens often, where say the Egyptian T will be transliterated into Hebrew as an S. So this is very common. But anyway, it's sea of reeds. It's sea of reeds. So, but when the translators of the Septuagint tried to translate Yam Suf, they didn't know exactly what to call it, so they called it the what was it now, the Thalassa or Rotothalassa, I think is they call this it in Septuagint. Um, uh, going to take me a moment to look this up in the Septuagint. Try to get it. Erythros thalassen. Erythros thalassus. Okay, so Erythran thalassan is Red Sea. Okay, or Ruddy Sea. Okay, so it's a translation of the Yom Suf that happened during the translation of the Septuagint. So when it was translated from the Hebrew to the Greek, they translated Yom Suf into Red Sea. Now you get to 1611. It's 1611 when the translators of the King James Version start doing their thing. They also don't know what Yom Suf means. Because they don't know what the word Suf is supposed to translate to. They got a rough idea. They know it reads, but that doesn't make a lot of sense to them. Like they know from, for example, Exodus 2, that Suf is used twice in Exodus 2. It's used in the making of the reed basket that Moses is placed in, and then he's floated among the reeds, also Suf. So what you got here is essentially the translation committee of 1611 are basically again going back to the Septuagint and saying, okay, what does the Septuagint say? Oh, it says Red Sea. We'll use that. That makes more sense to us than Sea of Reeds, Reed Sea. So it's a mistake of tradition. It's a mistake of translation. It's not a mistake because the original text was wrong. So we do find these traditional renderings that are frequently used in, say, translations, and even modern translations. And the reason why they're still used in modern translations is because people get really, really upset if you change it. If I did a translation of the Book of Exodus and I put in Reed Sea instead of Red Sea, in a Bible that's published, oh, the critics would go nuts. The average person would say, oh, that's not my Bible. Oh, no, this is one of those evil modern translations. I mean, if I translated, like Mercy Seat into Lid, which is probably the proper translation of Mercy Seat in the original, it's not as emotionally satisfying. It's not traditional. Keparet is a lid. It's a lid. It's a lid of a coffin, but we won't go there. But it's a lid. If you replaced every instance of Mercy Seat with lid in a biblical translation, people would go spare. You replace Red Sea with Reed Sea, people would go nuts. Because like, for example, it's one of the reasons why like John 3:16 is still translated the way it is. It's still with that King James translation of whosoever believes instead of the believing ones will be saved. Believing ones is better translation from the Greek. It's a vastly superior translation of John 3:16. But if you change John 3:16 in that way, people would go people would demand the translation committee's head. We are very attached to our traditions. Very, very attached to our traditions. And if you start translating things in certain ways, people get real upset real fast. So, and I like your comment here. I wouldn't be offended if it was the truth. I appreciate that sentiment. I think that's a noble sentiment. I think more people should have that sentiment. Unfortunately, most people will not have that sentiment. And most Bible readers will not have that sentiment. So this is why translation committees still use traditional renderings, even though it is invariably wrong. And we're going to encounter one of these traditional reads actually on our next Monday release, where we're going to talk about, well, we're doing another Exodus video. We finally got to doing another Exodus video. So we're going to engage an issue that does involve one of these traditional renderings and see the problems that it causes. So thank you very much for the question. It's a good question. It's a worthwhile question, but that's the reason. Is because Red Sea is a traditional rendering now in English, and if we changed it in our Bibles, people will get angry. Simple. Let's take a couple more non-super chats if there's some more available, and if there isn't, we'll just call it a night. So, because we've already gone through 3 hours, so, well, actually, not quite 3 hours yet. 2.5 hours, because we started late. Came home late for work. Okay. I'll take Marcy Powell's question here. The 603,550 arrived in numbers 1 only makes sense if you add. If Elf means clans and hundreds are something else, you only have 500 and clans. How do you make the census work for or with your view? Okay. We are not sure why these numbers are exactly the way. I'm going to be straight up honest here. It's clear that this number is not tenable. Okay? It's not tenable with the geography of Avaris or the region of the Nile Delta. Something else is happening here. We do know that ancient documents, as a normal course of everyday writing things down, exaggerate numbers. We see this at, for example, at the documentation of the battle against Alexander the Great and the Persians, Artaxerxes. He's battling an army of 2 million people. Well, no, there weren't 2 million people in the Persian army. Okay. The battle at Thermopylae, the numbers are greatly exaggerated. Greatly exaggerated. Ancient source documents do this. We don't know why. For example, Senefru was said to have brought back from Levant 400,000 slaves. That's a lot of slaves. For a tiny army to haul back. I mean, look, the Egyptian army at its height probably had no more than 8,000 people. The entire armed forces. Probably no more than 8,000. How does 8,000 people, and really most of them, I mean, these are foot soldiers. How are they going to bring back 400,000 slaves? They're not. There's some exaggeration here involved. Now, why are they being exaggerated? Hard to say. But there is some inflation for some reason, and we don't understand exactly why ancient documents did this. Because we do find some interesting things where, like, for example, physical dimensions tend to be a lot more consistent. Like, have a great correspondence to what happened in reality than, say, numbers of people. We don't know why ancient documents did this, but they did this. Okay? So we kind of have to understand, even if we don't find a solution to this, it doesn't disqualify the source. It just means we don't understand why it's this way. So with that said, I have started looking at this issue again. We Aleph does have that meaning of, say, clans or armies, divisions, or thousands. Okay? It could be any one of those. Hundreds also have a military connotation as well. And it has the connotation of say, smaller units, half clans, perhaps, um, basically, units, as in military units. So there's that as well, and got that out of Halot. The 50, that I'm still trying to figure out. Not quite sure how the 50 works into all this, and I'll be very honest. But, as of last week, I didn't know about the hundreds being a military unit either. I think what I'm going to have to do to really sort of get into this question in more detail is go to, say, Egyptian sources on how they describe their military units and see if I can find anything that's parallel. Because the numbers in the Book of Numbers, the censuses, do seem to have some sort of, say, military organization as well as maybe, say, a clan organization. So, again, we don't know. But, we also know that it's not inconsistent either with other historical documents of the ancient Near East. So, but I also know, too, that the Israelite society was obsessed with clans. Absolutely obsessed with them. You really can't read the Bible without reading about clans. Okay? And I would highly recommend any people get Clinton Bailey's book on, I think it's called Bedouin in the Bible or something like that. It's an excellent book. Clinton Bailey does a really good analysis of clan society and clan structure, and he's using the Bedouin. I think some of his biblical parallels are weak. I don't think it's nearly as strong as he suggests. I think he makes some serious mistakes, but I think they're mistakes that that don't undermine his overall thesis. It's a really good book. It's an excellent resource. It's published by Yale University Press. Excellent book, absolutely excellent book. So I highly recommend that for you to get if you really want a good primer on how clans work, how clan societies work, function. Because once you start thinking in those terms, a lot of stuff in the Bible just suddenly makes a lot of sense. So anyway, thank you very much for that question. Very much appreciated. I'm going to take this one. AMFN. It's not a question, it's just a comment. Sunday school teacher. Jonah had a propane burner in the belly of the fish. David C. Cook, the purveyor of bad Sunday school theology everywhere. David C. Cook is probably responsible for destroying more people's faith than practically any Christian publisher. People complain about Zondervan. Oh my gosh, Zondervan's done nothing terrible compared to what David C. Cook did. David C. Cook is just responsible for some of the most ridiculous biblical art that's routinely pinned up in Sunday schools everywhere. Oh yeah, we saw ones with a Harry Potter theme. But I still remember as a kid, seeing the David C. Cook, poster of Jonah. That's why I see this here. And and I kid you not, it was illustrated with a wooden table and Jonah sitting on a wooden chair, and he's got a little oil lamp there. It could have passed as a 3-star hotel. 2-star, okay. But it had its own pool facilities. Okay, Gould. Wait, I didn't know people disliked Zondervan. I must have been missing something. They're I believe they're owned by who owns them now? Was it HarperCollins or something like that? Yeah, they're people have gotten on Zondervan's case because they're now owned by a secular publishing house. Um, I don't get on Zondervan's case. I think they're still doing faithful work, even though they have been bought out by a secular publisher. But you do get some fundamentalist types who say, "Oh, you can't trust anything from Zondervan anymore because they're now corrupted by the world." So it's that pious crud. It's that pious crud. So, but I've heard people rag on Zondervan, while, as I said, putting David C. Cook up in the kindergarten class, and then wondering why their kids just are bailing on the faith. I wonder. So, what else? Close to the end here because I think we're running out of questions. And call it a night. All right, I think that's going to be the last one, unless I see one at the very end here, and I don't. So, that's all we're going to take for the night, it looks like. So, again, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. This has been a lot of fun. It always is. I really enjoy my Friday nights here with you guys. Again, I hope you enjoy our content on ancient Egypt and the Bible. And if you want more of this content, please do hit that subscribe button and the notification button so you don't miss out on anything. I want to thank all our participants in the live chat tonight. You guys have been great. You always come with great questions and interesting comments. I want to thank the super chatters, of course, because without you guys, we couldn't keep going. You guys help us make ends meet, and you really do help us in ways you can't even imagine. We also want to thank those who pray for us. We always covet your prayers, so if you pray for us, we appreciate that too very, very much. Also want to give special thanks to our Patreon supporters, and I also want to give thanks to those who just watch our videos every Monday, our shorts Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and this live stream. So with that said, I want to wish you all a very good night. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night, everyone.